does, and we can expect to see more of that from China in the years ahead. China marks the 70th anniversary of the founding of its Navy this year. So you can expect to see some shows of force like that this year in particular. China says it is not a threat to the rest of the world. It says its military is purely for self-defense. How true is that? This conversation requires an expert. So we spoke with Cheng. He's a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He knows China inside and out, and as he explains, China does have global ambitions. So, Mr. Cheng, first of all, thanks for being here. You have talked about what China sees as the period of strategic opportunity. Can you talk about what that is, what China sees as this moment?
So, beginning under Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leadership has basically said that for the foreseeable future, meaning a rolling, say, 10 years or so, there is no expectation of a major war between China and anybody else. And so this was the period of strategic opportunity for China to invest more money, more resources into building up its economy overall, to building infrastructure, to educating the population, to improving China's overall level of science and technology. And even now, under Xi Jinping, while China has increased tensions with many of its neighbors, nonetheless, it's still seen as a period when the likelihood of war is still considered low, and therefore, for all that China's military has been growing, it is not the highest priority. Modernization of the economy, informationization of the economy, that's still the highest priority.
So everything that we see now in terms of weapons development, in terms of heightened tensions in the South China Sea, is all of that peacefully intentioned?
It's not so much peacefully intentioned as it is occurring in a context where China's military is not its highest national priority. Its highest national priority is elevating its overall level of economic capability, is improving its national infrastructure, things like that. All that being said, from China's perspective, as it grows its military, as it builds islands in the South China Sea, it is also defending what they think is their own territory. China believes that most of the South China Sea is Chinese territory. Now, obviously, the Vietnamese and the Filipinos and the Malaysians would disagree with that. But from China's perspective, they are defending what they consider to be their own.
When most of us, and by most of us I mean those of us who don't have as intimate a knowledge of this kind of stuff as you do, see things like China going to the dark side of the moon and successfully growing cotton, it's cool. What should we keep in mind when we see things like that about what China might be trying to do in space?
Well, let's be upfront about this. China going to the far side of the moon, China growing cotton in a small test tube on the moon is cool. And part of what China is doing, like our landing on Mars with rovers and various other exploratory craft, is to push the frontiers of science. And the Chinese are upfront about that. But what we also need to keep in mind is that China's space program is administered through its military. Unlike NASA, there is no real civilian agency that has full responsibility for space exploration and the like. That lunar lander, for example, is part of the Chinese lunar exploration program, which is headed by a Chinese general officer. And so we do need to keep in mind that the technological advances that lead to these cool results are also supporting China's ability to do military space situational awareness, which in the future could be used to conduct anti-satellite tests and other military operations.
Right. So put all this in context then, from South China Sea to the moon. What is China's broad ambition here in terms of rearranging the way the world works effectively? Is it trying to make it more China-centric?
What China is trying to do is to basically establish its sovereignty, because there's probably no greater fan of the Treaty of Westphalia and sovereignty and sovereign nations than the People's Republic of China. What China is trying to do is to extend its sovereignty into areas that used to be international common spaces, to basically say China will establish the rules in certain parts of the world's oceans, in certain parts of outer space, in certain parts of cyberspace and the information domain. And you, the rest of the world, will have to abide by China's rules in those areas. It's not quite as overbearing and all-encompassing as, say, the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, but at the same time, it is absolutely running counter to how we think about international common spaces, where all nations have equal rights to participate, to exploit, to benefit from the seas, the internet, and outer space.
From your perspective, what's the best way to counter that?
The United States, first off, needs to have some idea of what it wants to do. For example, that we want to defend international common spaces and keep them common and international. After that, the next thing is that we need to be persistent and we need to be consistent. Very hard to do in a democracy where we have a new president every 4 years and a new Congress every 2 years. But we need to basically establish what it is we want and then to be very consistent in pursuing policies that support that.
You bring up an interesting point, and my last question is this. If China will respect a persistent, consistent message, China might have an upper hand on delivering something like that. Does Xi Jinping's bid at being president for life have to do with this ability to deliver a persistent, consistent message on the Chinese side?
That, I think, is absolutely part of the reason why Xi overturned term limits for being president and implicitly then term limits for being General Secretary of the Communist Party, which is even more important. But at the same time, it also betrays a certain level of weakness because it also suggests that Xi can't be sure that his successor will be persistent and consistent. The other thing is that from the American side, we have some trouble being consistent on message, but we're also often more flexible. And at the end of the day, our principles, individual liberty, freedom of choice, the ability to make decisions at something below the national state level over the economy and over individual lives is at least as appealing, if not more so, than what it is that China is offering.
It's a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate your perspective on all of this. Dean Cheng with us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. You know, China's quest for a new world order begins at home with its own economy. For years, the climate has suffered as a result. Now, China is moving to improve, just as the U.S. steps back from major agreements like the Paris Climate Accord. Does that create a new opening for China? Plus, as China's economy moves on, meet the people in Beijing's most inner city, whose livelihoods are turning to scars on the walls of history. We're back in 2 minutes.
Only a matter of time until your check engine light comes on, or worse yet, your car needs repair. That could mean a big surprise auto repair bill. Those repairs are more expensive than ever. A new engine can be over $5,000. A new transmission over $4,000. That's why it's so important you call CarShield today. CarShield is the #1 auto protection company in the country.
I liked CarShield because they were reliable, they were affordable, and they were trustworthy.
Well, I think everybody should have CarShield. Once your manufacturer's warranty is expired, there's just no big bills. If we needed repairs, CarShield was there for us.
Now it's your turn.